In the summer of 1993, in a South Florida resort community, a 20-year-old boy was found beaten and stabbed to death in one of the most brutal murders area police had ever seen.
Forensic evidence, yes, you would say that this person had been ripped apart as if by animals.
The murder was committed with extreme savagery.
It's like a message. He's got something against this person.
This was like one of the worst cases of human behavior that I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of up the road.
Soon, a bizarre story unfolded. One of sex, jealousy, and revenge. The twists and turns of this unfortunate crime have generated numerous magazine articles, a book, and a feature film. All explore the question of why did this boy have to die, and die so violently?
The whole thing is goofy. The whole thing does not make sense.
County, Florida is one of America's premier tourist destinations. 7 million visitors from across the world descend on Fort Lauderdale, its main city, every year. For most residents, it's a comfortable life. Poverty is low, and the always growing tourist economy has created a thriving middle class. Bobby Kent grew up in Hollywood, Florida, a suburb of Fort Lauderdale, learning to surf and taking full advantage of the beaches and warm, sunny weather. Bobby graduated with good grades from South Broward High School. While not an overachiever, he was motivated and popular. After graduation, Bobby enrolled in the local community college and picked up extra money working at a local grocery store. Bobby Kent had ambitions. He wanted to start his own car stereo business.
Bobby is a willful kid. He's a goal-directed young man. Bobby is somebody who finishes high school and goes on to college and has plans to go into business with his father. He has a certain amount of ability to discipline his life.
Bobby also developed a passion for weightlifting and frequented the gym for hours a day. He became extremely well-developed, packing some 170 pounds on his 5'6" frame.
He had just size, you know? I don't know if you watch wrestling, but like, if you take The Rock and make The Rock a little bit flabbier, just take out the definition, but just like the size and the shoulders, that's how he was. I mean, he was a big dude.
On July 13th, 1993, Bobby told his parents he was going out for the evening. With whom, he didn't say. Around midnight, Bobby's best friend, Marty Puccio, called Bobby's home. When the phone machine answered, he left an unusual message. Marty said he had gotten home safely and was calling just as Bobby requested.
I called you. You asked me to call you when I got home.
The call woke Mr. Kent, and when he heard the message, he immediately checked to see if Bobby was home. He was not, which was highly unusual.
This was a kid who came home at night and went to bed in his bed, and so he hadn't shown up, and his parents were very upset.
By the next morning, Bobby still wasn't home. His father was convinced something was seriously wrong and walked to Marty Puccio's house to see if he had seen Bobby. Marty and his girlfriend, Lisa Conley, both answered the door.
It's Bobby here.
Marty said Bobby had a date with a girl he met at work. He then said he hoped Bobby wasn't a victim of some type of local gang violence. Before he could explain further, Lisa Conley interrupted and ended the conversation.
We haven't seen him.
So that had the effect of really alarming Fred Kent. He decided that, in fact, something must have happened to his son, and he needed to get to the bottom of it, and he went straight home and called the police.
Police treated Bobby Kent's disappearance as a missing persons case But like Mr. Kent, police thought Marty Puccio knew more about Bobby's whereabouts than he was admitting. Police taped their interview with Marty.
Do you have any personal knowledge as to what might have happened to Bobby?
I hope he's not. I pray to God he's not dead. Because I don't know how I'd live my life. It'd be very hard for me.
The same series of questions was asked of Lisa Conley.
Do you know who had anything to do with Bobby's disappearance?
If I knew, I would tell you.
And police questioned Bobby's other friends to see if they knew where he had gone. One was Bobby's one-time girlfriend, 19-year-old Allie Willis, who didn't have many good things to say about Bobby.
Bobby was very abusive, raped her, according to Allie, and beat her up.
But Bobby's parents and the police were convinced that of all Bobby's friends, the one he was closest to and the one Bobby always confided in was 19-year-old Marty Puccio. The two had known each other since childhood, growing up 4 doors away from each other in Pembroke Pines, an upscale neighborhood near Fort Lauderdale. The two were unusually close. After high school, Marty and Bobby spent most of their time together. Marty shared Bobby's passion for weightlifting, and both were regulars at the gym. Weightlifting soon became an obsession, with Bobby and Marty reportedly using anabolic steroids to help build their muscles faster.
There was some talk about them being on steroids. Well, we did speak to personnel there, and they told us that there was a couple of incidences there at the Y where they actually got physically involved with people there as far as pushing people around.
Despite their friendship, police learned that Bobby would often get violent with Marty, and it wasn't just harmless fun. A friend of both boys related a particularly disturbing story. He said he watched as Bobby forced Marty to play with his pet Doberman.
Marty knew from experience that the Doberman would attack him if he went into the backyard and bite him, and pleaded with Bobby not to make him do it, and Bobby insisted.
But just as always, Bobby's dog attacked. The dog lacerated Marty's arms and bit him around the legs. When it was over, Marty was bleeding, humiliated, and Bobby was laughing. Dr. Helen Smith, a forensic psychologist familiar with this case, offers a possible explanation.
This sounded almost like a sadomasochistic relationship that was going on between Puccio and Bobby Kent.
Come on, play with the dog.
Young boys and girls can kind of play these games where one of them is the instigator of violence and the other one is the recipient, and there's something very satisfying about it to both of them psychologically.
Another person who experienced Bobby Kent's dark side was a gay man the boys met at the gym. The man reportedly expressed an interest in the well-built pair, but there was no evidence that Bobby or Marty had any sexual interest in men. But Bobby had an idea, a way he and Marty could use this man to make some money. They would produce and direct a gay pornographic movie with his father's video equipment. Their new friend would be the star. The man agreed.
Video consisted of the man standing in front of the camera and dancing naked and performing certain sex acts on himself. I don't know the details of why they were able to get him to do it. I don't believe that they paid him. I think this grew out of a relationship between the three.
When it was completed, Bobby tried to sell the video to numerous adult bookstores in the area, but it was poorly made and no one was interested. Bobby and Marty were thrilled with their pornographic efforts and never missed an opportunity to show it to friends.
They turned it on. It's some, gay guy masturbating. Bobby's like just staring at like, yeah, this is cool. We made this, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's time for me to go. And he's like, oh, you don't think this is cool? And I'm like, no, and I'll be outside.
Get somebody else to do it.
For whatever reason, Bobby decided to make a second gay pornographic movie. This time, however, his homosexual friend wanted no part of it. When he said no, Bobby became enraged and punched him in the stomach, knocking him to the floor. Marty helped the man up. As the man regained his breath, he got another surprise. Marty punched him too. The bullying and violence was a common theme between the two, and occasionally it took on other forms. Bobby and Marty frequented a popular local nightclub, one that featured male dancing.
Fort Lauderdale, that's sort of a tough place. There are a lot of tough young boys, young men who dance there, who strip for tips and money. It's a funny environment. Some of those young men would beat you up if you said they were gay. But they do strip for this male homosexual audience who then come up and give them tips and in some instances arrange assignations.
Published accounts say that Bobby pushed Marty into dancing at the club. Marty was reluctant, but became something of a hit among club regulars.
Marty was dancing on stage at Bobby's insistence, and then they were splitting the money that Marty earned by dancing there.
When Marty wanted to quit, Bobby refused to allow it and allegedly blackmailed him by threatening to tell friends that Marty was a homosexual.
All the dancing and throwing the dog on you, it's humiliating.
Lisa Connolly was appalled at the way Bobby treated her boyfriend Marty and would often complain about it. But for reasons only dimly understood, even now, there was a violent undercurrent in relations between the two. And their aggression was often directed at others, mostly those who were smaller and weaker.
At the grocery store where Marty and Bobby worked, there was an adult male who was retarded and was a sacker. And they knew when this man got off work. This is a man who walked to a nearby apartment where he lived. He didn't have a car, and he carried groceries home at the end of the day. So one of their games, both of them, Bobby and Marty, was to wait for this man to get off work and then to follow him along the road, and they would take a football and throw it at the man's head as hard as they could to try to make him fall with his groceries. They thought that kind of thing was funny. And I think that speaks volumes about what kind of kids both of these young men were.
4 days after Bobby Kent's disappearance, Broward County homicide detective Frank Ilaraza was told that a body had been found in a deserted location near the Everglades. The decomposing body was clad in the white t-shirt and jeans Bobby Kent had last been wearing. The driver's license on the victim provided positive identification. It was Bobby Kent.
The body tells you how it was killed, what type of weapon that was used, where it happened, how it happened, whether it was someone that person knew who was close to him. Depending on the number of injuries on the body, it tells you a lot.
What started as a routine missing persons investigation for Bobby Kent now was a murder case. And the murder scene revealed it was a crime of enormous violence. Blood trails around the crime scene, marked with red pylons by police, showed a massive loss of blood. These trails indicated the murder had taken some time and happened over an area of about 30 feet. The scene showed that Bobby Kent had put up a fight.
Bobby was hard to kill. He was a big, strong kid with strong muscles, and he was in great shape.
No murder weapons were found at the scene. Some tire tracks were present, but it was not known if they were connected to the murder. There were very few clues, except the body of the victim. The cause of death was a stab wound to the heart. There were also stab wounds in the back and front of his neck and in the abdomen. And Bobby suffered a head injury caused by some type of blunt object. This meant there were at least 2 murder weapons. Since a killer rarely switches weapons in the middle of an attack, This spoke volumes to investigators.
It told us that it was more than one person because you had stab wounds and you had blunt head trauma. So that in itself told us that it was more than one person that was involved in doing this.
There was a particular viciousness in this crime. It might make me think that it was a gang crime.
In their search, investigators discovered that Bobby Kent had abusive and sometimes violent relationships with his so-called friends. This was certainly true of his best friend, Marty Puccio, but also with Marty's girlfriend, an 18-year-old high school dropout named Lisa Conley. She was slightly overweight and very self-conscious about it. Marty Puccio, a good-looking surfer type with a highly developed physique, was her first boyfriend. Lisa's cousin, Derek DeVerco, said she was obsessed with Marty.
If Marty would have told my cousin to get up on a roof and do a half gator and land in the grass, you know, she'd ask, do you want a 10-point dive? She would have done it.
Lisa Conley was no fan of Bobby Kent. Bobby ridiculed Lisa, often calling her Shamu the Whale, a reference to her weight. She also believed that Marty was spending too much time with Bobby and not enough time with her. Derek DeVerco also thought Bobby and Marty were unusually close.
When I seen one, the other one's always around. They were like the two M&Ms in the commercial, red and yellow. When you seen one, the other one was around.
And another person out of Bobby's past, with her own possible vendetta against him, was his one-time girlfriend, Allie Willis, a 19-year-old high school dropout who was no stranger to law enforcement. She was a former teen prostitute, making $150 an hour working for an escort service that catered to men with a penchant for underage girls. She told friends that Bobby had once raped her on a date, but she never reported it to police. Ellie's new boyfriend, 18-year-old Donnie Semenek, also had expressed anger towards Bobby for the alleged rape. In order to determine whether these potential suspects had an alibi for the time of Bobby's murder, the time of death needed to be established. Bobby Kent had been missing for 4 days before the body was discovered. Time of death is usually established in 3 ways. One is body temperature, not workable in Bobby Kent's case since too much time had passed. The body was already cold when found. Another method is to examine the victim's stomach contents and the stage of digestion. In Bobby Kent's case, no identifiable matter was found in his digestive tract. The third method is insect activity. Sand crabs and fly larvae, also called maggots, were feeding on the corpse.
It may be very impossible, just given the stage of decomposition, to come up with an estimate of time of death. That's why we use the maggots, because the maggots are a quantitative method of using a scientific means, a natural science means of establishing the time interval of death.
Flies have a keen sense of smell and can pick up the scent of a dead body from over a mile away.
They'll be laying eggs within the first 2 hours, 3 hours after death, given the adequate environmental conditions. If it's 80 degrees, it's a nice summer day, and we have sunlight, daylight, the flies will be out searching, and if you die, they're going to find you very, very fast.
The development of the larvae can tell investigators when the victim died. The warmer the temperature, the faster the development. This was southern Florida at the height of summer. Average temperature was about 90 degrees. Perfect conditions for the larvae to develop. Forensic entomologists put larvae from Bobby's body into alcohol to stop the growth process so they could be analyzed. Since larvae go through 3 stages before they hatch into tiny flies, their development told the medical examiner that Bobby Kent's body had been in the water 4 days before it was discovered, which was the night he was reported missing. All police had to do now was to find out who was with Bobby Kent on the night he was killed. As police searched for Bobby Kent's killers, there was no shortage of suspects. Bobby's best friend, Marty Puccio, Marty's girlfriend, Lisa Conley, and Allie Willis, Bobby's former girlfriend, all had motive and no solid alibis for the night Bobby was murdered. At first glance, Lisa Conley seemed to be the least likely to be involved. She was apparently the only one of the three who hadn't been physically abused by Bobby Kent. But witnesses say Lisa was outraged at the physical abuse her boyfriend Marty suffered at Bobby's hand. Jim Schutz is the author of Bully, a book on the case.
She talked about him constantly, nervously. The idea of losing Marty was like death itself to her. Marty was that important. He was her every waking moment's obsession.
Lisa was convinced that Bobby Kent was no real friend of Marty's and that he would be much better off without him. She also saw him as a rival to her relationship with Marty. But how does a girlfriend separate two boys who have been best friends their entire lives?
She knew that there was, as I said, a love-hate relationship between Kent and Puccio, and that they were not going to split up unless, it's almost like in a divorce case. Some divorces are not over until one of them is dead.
I think there's something really messed up with him.
Investigators learned that Lisa made statements to Marty and others that Bobby deserved to die for all the violence he had inflicted on them and their friends. Through informants, investigators also learned of a meeting Lisa had prior to Bobby's disappearance. She gathered a group of friends, some who had a history with Bobby and others who barely seemed to know him. Her boyfriend Marty was there. Allie Willis was too. So was Allie's new boyfriend, 18-year-old Donnie Semenek, eager to avenge the alleged rape. Lisa's cousin, Derek DeVerco, was also there, along with a crack-addicted 18-year-old named Heather Swallers. Both participated in the meetings for reasons still not fully known. When the group gathered, Lisa laid out a plan to repay Bobby Kent for the way he had treated others. But Lisa was aware the group needed two things. They needed weapons and the help of someone who had experience committing murder. They turned to 20-year-old Derek Kaufman, a 6'3", 240-pound high school dropout, who, like all the others, came from a respectable middle-class family.
Several of these people had known each other, but Derek Kaufman, for example, was virtually unknown to everybody when he came and became involved in this particular event. And he was kind of, for lack of a better term, I think he was brought along as the muscle in this particular instance.
Derek Kaufman, who had never even met Bobby Kent, bragged to the group that he was a mafia hitman. What they didn't know was that he was insecure, unemployed, and hung around with younger people who were naive enough to believe his stories. The group was now set, and witnesses say the discussions soon turned to murder.
So there's this funny kind of conversational chemistry going on where they take this act, which is basically unthinkable, and they make it thinkable, and they make it they turn it into real life.
Under any other circumstance, they wouldn't have done something like this. But they all get together, they're doing drugs, they're talking about it, and they come up with a plan to do this.
Although Derek DeVerco was present at the meeting where Bobby Kent's murder was discussed, he claims he never thought the group would do it.
Nobody was thinking about jail. I guess everybody was in their, in their own subconscious or whatever, trying to put it together. And, like I said, for me, it was just like, where during all this conversation was it really serious, and I didn't catch it.
When the group couldn't locate any guns, witnesses say that Marty Puccio located one scuba knife, and Donnie Semenek brought the other. Derek DeVerco, who thought they were just going to scare Bobby Kent, went home and grabbed this 25-ounce aluminum baseball bat. All they needed now was some way to lure Bobby Kent to a deserted place. On Wednesday night, July 18th, 1993, Marty Puccio dressed for an event that would forever change his life. He was preparing to murder his boyhood friend, Bobby Kent. In the bathroom of his home, Marty put on a long black trench coat and then tied a bright red bandana around his head. A murderous rage had apparently built up inside of Marty. But why would he want his best friend dead? The two had been close for most of their lives.
just close the door, man.
But their relationship was marked by strange episodes of violence, episodes in which Marty was always the victim. A few years earlier, Marty asked his parents to move to another town. When they declined, Marty moved in with relatives in New York State. Friends say the move was motivated by Marty's need to get away from Bobby Kent. But he eventually returned to his parents' home, and when he did, the bullying started all over again. Tom Kazel was Marty Puccio's lawyer.
It almost reminds me of the battered wife syndrome. We've heard a lot of testimony, and there have been some psychological studies which show that a woman is justified in killing her husband if the husband is really dominant and beats her up and abuses her either mentally or physically. And so that's not an unusual phenomenon in today's society. What is perhaps unusual is that it would exist between two men, and even teenagers at that point.
But not everyone agrees. Some say Marty was drawn to the violence and was every bit as cruel as Bobby.
The trouble with seeing Marty as an innocent victim and as a passive victim of Bobby is that Marty went along with Bobby on some of his bullying adventures, like beating up gay guys, like beating up retarded kids. Marty was a bully too. Bobby was just a bigger, stronger bully than Marty.
Derek DeVerco gave police the names of everyone with Marty and Lisa on the night Bobby was killed. When questioned by police, with the exception of Marty Puccio and Lisa Conley, all told the same story. A story so incredible, investigators at first weren't sure what to make of it. In 2 cars, they drove to Bobby Kent's house and asked him to join them for a night of partying. Bobby accepted. They chose a remote area about 30 miles inland from the Florida coast on the edge of the Everglades.
They pulled off the highway in a desolate area, parked the cars, got out. Incredibly enough, even at that point, as they're getting out of the cars to kill Bobby, they still have not finalized a plan.
The plan involved Allie Willis leading Bobby Kent to the water's edge on the pretense of having sex. Everyone headed towards the water, except Lisa, who stayed behind. The cue for the attack was to come from Heather Swallers.
I think there are any alligators in there.
And when she did, the attack began. Donnie Semenek struck the first blow, a stab wound in the back of the neck. As the girls rushed to the cars, Bobby Kent staggered and called to Marty, begging him for help.
Marty, help me, it's freak!
Marty started coming to him. He's like, "Oh, Marty, I'm bleeding." Marty just gutted him.
Bobby was now surrounded by Marty, Derek Kaufman, Derek DeVerco, and Donnie Semenek. Slowly bleeding to death, he pleaded for his life.
Bobby then calls to Marty, "My God," and says, "I'm sorry for whatever I've done," and begs for mercy.
In front of the cars, in the beams of the headlights, Bobby Kent struggled to breathe.
Marty straddles Bobby and takes his hunting knife and slits his throat.
Derek Kaufman, who didn't even know Bobby Kent, straddled his body with a baseball bat and struck the final blow.
It was like everything stopped. This was one of the worst cases of human behavior that I've ever seen.
If anyone says a word about this, I swear I will kill them.
Everyone there took that threat seriously.
After seeing 3 people brutally kill somebody and like hunt him down, how could I not believe him, you know? And it's just, it scared me to death.
The group lifted the body and rolled it to the water's edge, apparently in the belief that alligators would eat it. That night, after he returned home from the murder, Marty Puccio made a mistake.
Bobby, this is Marty Puccio. I called you. You asked me to call you when I...
The telephone call to Bobby Kent's house, which Mr. Kent found suspicious, prompted him to call police. The police carefully analyzed the conspirator stories and discovered that they matched the wounds found on Bobby Kent's body at the autopsy. First was a 1-inch stab wound to the back right side of the neck. Not a fatal wound, but the type that would cause a large amount of bleeding. There was a gaping 3-inch wound to the upper right abdomen, struck with enough force to almost pierce the back. A rip in Bobby Kent's t-shirt showed the entry point of the next wound. A stabbing blow to the heart, the fatal wound. 3 chambers of the heart muscle were punctured as the knife passed all the way through to the left lung. On the right temple was a 2-inch vertical laceration, the wound caused by the baseball bat. A blow struck hard enough to fracture 2 vertebrae in the upper part of his spine. Finally, there were 2 sawing wounds, one 4 inches long, the other 5, directly across the front of the neck. These wounds were apparently inflicted while Bobby Kent was already flat on his back and semi-conscious, to make absolutely sure he was dead. Police had no doubt these suspects were telling the truth.
In this case, you have the body. Without the body, you have a story that's being told by them, but you really have no way of knowing whether that's true or not. But now you have the body, so the body, you're able to show that what they're telling us is consistent with what we have on the body.
The knives used in the crime were never recovered. They were thrown into the water after the murder. The bat was found, but tested negative for blood. Police arrested all 7 individuals and charged them with first-degree murder. The defense in all the cases was exactly the same.
Each kid tried to argue through his attorney or her attorney that he or she was not the principal actor, was in fact just an innocent bystander. The common theme you heard both in the courthouse and from the parents was these were good kids, or this was a good kid who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
In an already bizarre case, investigators learned about an earlier attempt on Bobby Kent's life, one that would prove conclusively who had masterminded his murder. With all of the known conspirators in jail awaiting trial for Bobby Kent's murder, Lisa Conley contended that she was innocent since she was at the car away from the area where the murder took place.
Lisa Conley was the ringleader behind this whole thing. She's the one who orchestrated it. She's the one who had a motive for Bobby being out of the way.
Lisa Conley was the dynamic leader in the group, and she was the one that initiated it, and she was the one that wanted Kent out of the picture because Kent was interfering with her relationship with Puccio.
Lisa Connolly kept it going. Lisa Connolly motivated the others. Lisa Connolly worked out logistical problems about getting weapons and cover stories and so on.
Investigators learned that there was an earlier attempt on Bobby Kent's life, the night before the actual murder. It was a plan hatched by Lisa Conley and included Allie Willis. Lisa's mother owned a small .25 caliber Beretta handgun, which Lisa had planned to use. It was easy to conceal, and at close range was sure to do the job. Lisa and Allie Willis had asked Bobby to join them one night for a drive to a deserted area with the promise of sex. As Allie and Bobby walked towards the water, Lisa stayed behind. The girls had solved the problem of how to shoot Bobby without also hitting Allie. On a prearranged signal, Allie would discreetly get out of the way. Giving Lisa a clean shot. With Bobby's life in her hands, she couldn't do it. Bobby left the scene completely unaware of how close he'd come to losing his life. Lisa was also afraid the gun could be traced back to her because of ballistics and the fact that the gun was registered in her mother's name. Despite this failure, Lisa still pushed for Bobby Kent's murder. The second time, she was successful, although she still maintains her innocence. For experts on teen violence like Dr. Helen Smith, Lisa Conley's unwillingness to accept responsibility is no surprise.
Girls typically have a really hard time with direct aggression, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of the strongest reasons is girls want to avoid responsibility. Okay, if you commit a murder and you can instigate the murder and get everybody else to do it, manipulate people into doing what you want them to do, then you're not responsible. She said up until the end that, look, I'm not responsible. I didn't touch the guy.
South Florida, and soon the nation, were shocked by the brutality of the crime. How, the public asked, could a group of middle-class teenagers become capable of such violence? Dr. Charles Patrick Ewing, author of Kids Who Kill, says the answers vary, and that there's no clear-cut explanation.
What starts out as an idea or a fantasy only becomes reality when one of the people in the group acts on it. And then that act by that one person unleashes the acts of the others. It gives permission to the others to act out violently, and in some cases it stimulates violence.
Among members of a like-minded group, an almost pack mentality can develop, and on rare occasions spiral into murder if one or more members of the group can convince the others that their violent fantasies are justified. Almost all experts familiar with the Bobby Kent case say that if just one of the conspirators had pointed out that there were real-life consequences for murder, the whole plot may have unraveled. The questions and the notoriety raised by the case prompted interest from all over the world. There was even a feature film entitled Bully, based on Jim Schutz's book of the same name.
He beats me. He's raped me before. The worst part is the way he picks on Marty. He treats him like a dog or a slave or something. Pisses me off so bad I can't stand it.
So what are you gonna do, Lisa?
I'm gonna kill him.
Don Murphy was the film's producer.
These weren't kids from broken homes. These were kids from middle-class homes in Hollywood, Florida. These weren't kids who you would normally think would get involved in something like this. So to me, what was fascinating was the dichotomy. And to me, what was fascinating was I could see why they would want to kill this guy. And then I couldn't understand why they did. And I thought if I could convey that in a motion picture, you'd have something pretty special.
That aspect of the case is one that continues to generate controversy. Was Bobby Kent, in fact, a bully? Or was this just a convenient defense for a group of bored teenagers, all high school dropouts, who had nothing better to do with their lives than killing someone? 20 months after Bobby Kent's murder, all of the conspirators went on trial, and all pleaded not guilty. Each said they weren't responsible. They were just along for the ride, and all pointed their fingers at one another. In 7 separate trials, all were found guilty of murder and conspiracy. Derek Kaufman, who struck Bobby in the head with the baseball bat, got life in prison, as did Donnie Semenek, the first one to stab Bobby. Allie Willis was sentenced to 40 years in prison. This was later reduced, and she is now free. Heather Swallers turned state's evidence, served 6 years in prison, and is also free. Derek DeVerco, who was there at the murder but did not strike Bobby Kent, is now free after spending 6 years in prison. Even though he brought the bat, DeVerco continues to maintain he didn't think it would end in murder.
Worst case scenario, they were just going to jump him. You know, it was just going to be a 3-on-1. They were just going to beat the shit out of him. So, but like I said, it didn't happen that way. You know, I wish it would have happened that way.
For his role in the murder, Marty Puccio was sentenced to die in the electric chair. His sentence was later reduced to life in prison. Lisa Conley was also sentenced to life in prison, but her sentence was later reduced. Lisa Conley and Marty Puccio still maintain contact. At the time of the murder, Lisa was pregnant. While in prison, she gave birth to a baby girl. She claims that Marty Puccio is the father, but rumors persist that the real father is Bobby Kent.
Marty was saying no, it wasn't his, because they were saying she slept with both of them. And I asked her to be really honest with me, and she said no. She never slept with Bobby Kent.
Lisa's cousin, Derek, sees the child regularly.
My niece, you know, unfortunately, my niece is very smart. So she knows her dad's never coming home. She knows her mom's in prison. She don't know why, but she knows they did something bad.
Lisa will gain custody of the child upon her release from prison. Her relationship with Marty Puccio, the one she protected so obsessively, is broken but still alive.